Chapter 2, The Kilt of Melbourne. Victoria Atterbury and William Melbourne formed an incredible team. They both worked very well together, and William thought he'd never had such an efficient and reliable assistant. William discovered that this young lady was very intelligent and mature, and surprisingly had ideas and opinions very similar to his own, that her way of thinking was very similar to his. The girl was curious and meticulous, perfectionist. She liked to corroborate any historical data with several sources and to expand the information. She also had the ability to correct the texts, to suggest small changes of words or phrases that improved the style of William's writing. William was amazed at each one's ability to read the other's mind, and was especially amused by the fact that each one often terminated each other's sentences. Of course there were differences of opinion between them sometimes, but they were resolved with relative ease. They both laughed a lot together, shared experiences and funny anecdotes, and William told jokes that made Victoria laugh to tears. William felt happy and lively, even rejuvenated, and he was very inspired when he sat down to write. Sometimes he would watch Victoria quietly while she worked on her small desk, so concentrated that she did not realize he was spying on her. He delighted in that beautiful face, so sweet and childish. In her long hair, and her little hands writing with pen or working on the keys of the typewriter. He loved the girl's fashion, casual yet elegant, flawless, with pretty, vaporous dresses ideal for summer. Especially he liked the detail of her feet. Melbourne soon realized that she liked to pull her feet out of her flat dancer shoes and put them on the floor under the desk when she thought he did not see her, but when he was going to her, Victoria was thrusting her feet into her shoes so that he would not notice. Until one day he said it to her funny. "Victoria, if you want to go barefoot, I do not care, you can do it. After all, we work in my house and not in an office or in the university. I think we can afford it ourselves certain little freedoms for the sake of comfort," Melbourne said amusedly and with a charming smile. "It's that I love to go barefoot whenever I can." My mother was enraged because she said that apart from being in bad taste in a well-educated lady, I would also get ugly feet, deformed for to tread barefoot all the time in ground, Victoria said with a sweet, childlike laugh. "Well, I think your feet are very beautiful, and it's a part of the female anatomy that I tend to notice a lot about. I could almost say I have a fetish," said Melbourne with a smile and a giggle at the end. "They look beautiful to you." "Thank you. I've never been told. Well, I guess it's better to be comfortable while working," Victoria said, blushing. From that day Victoria took off her shoes as soon as she entered William's house and was barefoot all the time. They ate together almost every day, in William's house and often in William's friend's pub. When they ate at home sometimes he cooked and sometimes she, and both cooked very well. Sometimes they walked together around the village. "Victoria, do not you get bored a little? I mean, we've worked so hard these days that we've never left the village, and in your spare time you spend it with me or alone at the hostel. I do not think you have not seen much of the Highlands," Melbourne asked one day as they strolled around the village. "Well, I'd really like to take a little walk and get to know more about these lands, but our work is so exciting that I did not have time to get bored," Victoria said, telling the truth halfway, since the other part of the truth was that she also enjoyed much company from him. "I think it's my duty to make sure you enjoy it, even a little, in your summer. That's why I wanted to propose you that we take one day at least for a walk. I want to take you to do something that you like or to know some nice place or pleasant." "If you want, of course," said Melbourne kindly and seemingly calm, but with certain nerves not knowing very well why. Because it was an innocent offer without romantic intention, or at least that wanted to believe. "Of course!" Victoria exclaimed excitedly, regretting that it had been very obvious. "And where would you take me?" she asked more calmly. "I do not know, where would you like to go? If you have any suggestions, I accept it delighted and I'll take you wherever you want," Melbourne said cheerfully. "How about we go swimming in the lake? It would be very..." Victoria began. "That would be the only exception to the offer, I'm sorry. I do not like to go swimming," William replied kindly, but in a somewhat conclusive way. You do not know how to swim? Victoria asked curiously. No, is not that. I know how to swim, I just do not like it. I do not like swimming in public, a stupid craze of older man, I guess. Melbourne sounded evasive and uncomfortable, as if he did not want to talk about it. I see, well, I do not know. Actually, I cannot think of anything right now, she replied honestly. Would you like to go to a folk festival? Asked Melbourne. A traditional Scottish festival? Sounds interesting, Victoria replied. Yes, you know, a meeting of the Scottish clans of the Highlands. Music, clothing, games, and food, all typical of the Highlands, he informed her. I'd love to go, said Victoria. All right. Then we should find a suitable clothing for you, I'll take you to buy it this afternoon, said Melbourne. Do you have to dress in the Scottish way? How good. I guess you already have your traditional clothes, Victoria said enthusiastically. Yes it is. 2 days later, Victoria was at the door of the Melbourne house waiting for him. She was dressed appropriately for the occasion, with a kilted skirt as the most striking garment. The girl took a powder box from her purse and was looking in the mirror, making sure that her hair and face looked impeccable. Then the door opened and Melbourne left, and Victoria opened her eyes in surprise. Melbourne wore typical Highland attire, including the kilt, the typical skirt worn by the Scottish men. Victoria looked down from Melbourne's waist and had to make an effort not to laugh. But in the gesture of her face and the grimace of her mouth it was evident that she could not bear the urge to laugh, and Melbourne looked at her with irony. Come on. Laugh. You cannot stand the urge to laugh, said Melbourne as if it were a reproach, in a half-ironic and half-mocking tone. Victoria burst into laughter. I cannot help it. You look so picturesque, ha ha. Victoria exclaimed with laughter. Melbourne also laughed. As you can tell, you are a outlander. You cannot appreciate the virile attractive of a Highland man, Melbourne said mockingly. Are you a Scottish Highlander? Victoria asked, amused. Well, my mother was, you should know if you studied my biography. English father and Scottish mother, a woman of the Highlands, whose lineage goes back to the time of the first kings of Scotland, until the origin of the traditional clans. In my blood there are blood of Scottish warriors, and so I am only honouring my ancestors, said Melbourne, and at the end of his speech he laughed, and Victoria laughed with him. And no, forget it, Victoria said with some embarrassment. What were you about to say? Say it with confidence, replied Melbourne intrigued and amused. Do you use the kilt the old way? I mean, without underwear, Victoria asked with amusement and some malice as they both laughed out loud. The dirty mind of a woman. No, for your disappointment, in that. I'm not traditional. I wear underpants under the kilt. I do not like the air down there, Melbourne teased. I see. Victoria said, blushing as she glimpsed the strong legs of Melbourne. Shall we go now? Victoria, as to that, do not you think it would be better than me? Said Melbourne a little nervous. William, we had agreed that we were going in my car, Victoria said, turning serious. Yes, but, would there be any chance that you would reconsider that agreement? Or at least you let me drive, Melbourne asked shyly. William, you know how bothering me that you question my driving. You're very alarmist and exaggerated, I just like to run a little, but I'm very careful and skillful, Victoria replied with some anger. If you say it. Well, let's not argue, come on, we're going to be late, said Melbourne resigned and impatient. Melbourne was nervous all the way to the site of the festival, while Victoria drove at high speed down the road and recklessly in Melbourne's opinion, boldly but surely in Victoria's view. Upon arriving at the place, Melbourne was able to relax and began to enjoy the atmosphere, and endeavoured to amuse Victoria. She was enthusiastic and she enjoyed the typical competitions, of performances of singers and folkloric music groups. Encouraged by Melbourne, she tried to learn traditional dances. She admired crafts. Melbourne participated in some competitions that required physical effort and skill, and Victoria admired his physical condition, and she could not help but delight in sensual malice. They also ate and drank, mostly drank. Getting carried away by the euphoria of the moment, Victoria drank a lot, trying different types of drinks, especially the whiskey that ran in abundance. Victoria, you're drinking a lot. Lower the pace a little, or you're going to end up unconscious on the floor, William warned kindly, but seriously. Does not matter. You take me home, she replied, amused, already drunk. Victoria. He exclaimed more seriously, reproachfully. Okay, Dad, said Victoria submissively. But she continued to drink despite his protests, and when he finally got her to stop, she was already drunk. Melbourne did not depart from Victoria, worried about her safety when she was drunk, fearing that one of the men at the festival would try to take advantage of her. At one point, they both turned away from the crowd and went into a corner somewhat far from the tents where all sorts of things were sold, especially alcohol and food. On their way they saw a young couple kissing on a tree. Some are giving good use to their time, Victoria exclaimed wryly, but looking sideways at Melbourne with longing and desire. Victoria, I think we should go, it's late and you've had a lot of drinking, said Melbourne sensibly. No, not yet. It's still early. Let's have fun, let's dance, exclaimed Victoria, euphoric by drunkenness, grabbing a hand to Melbourne and trying to pull him, but what she got was stumbling, and Melbourne had to pull her so she did not fall to ground. Victoria ended up in the arms of Melbourne, hugging him and her face very close to his bare chest in his half-opened shirt. Victoria lifted her head and looked into Melbourne's eyes, her eyes sparkling with desire. Why, when I am with you I often feel that I am living a déjà vu? Victoria asked in a tone that reflected desire and emotion, but also, strangely, sadness and nostalgia. I do not know, I also sometimes feel the same, as if I had known you for a long time and some things we had already lived before, although recently I know you, answered Melbourne in a voice broken by emotion, with shivering in his body and with his arms hugging Victoria as if he wanted to protect her or not let her go. Emboldened by the liquor, Victoria stood on tiptoe and tried to bring her lips closer to his, but Melbourne reacted and turned his face aside. Victoria, we must go, you are very, said Lord Melbourne nervously. But then Victoria's face twisted in disgust and she put her hand to her mouth, and by her looks Melbourne knew she was going to vomit. Victoria, no. Come, said Melbourne, and taking her by the shoulders made her lean to one side. Melbourne held the hair loose from her with affection so that she would not get dirty and made her bow her head so she would vomit. That's good girl, expel everything, do not leave anything, said Melbourne, friendly and reassuring, but with a gesture of revulsion in the face. Melbourne patted Victoria on the back and when she finished vomiting put his hands on the girl's shoulders and gently made her turn to face her. You're good? asked Melbourne a little worried. I suppose. But I'm a little dizzy, Victoria replied with a frown on her face and narrowed eyes. Okay, it's normal. I told you that you drank too much, Melbourne said affectionately as he took out a handkerchief and tenderly wiped Victoria's mouth, and then put the handkerchief in her hand. Come on, we'll leave. I'll buy a bottle of water for you. We got into the car and left. Melbourne slipped his arm around the girl's waist and she leaned her head on his shoulder, making him smile. They both walked as if they were engaged, since he did not dare release her for fear that she would stumble and fall. When they got to the car, Melbourne sat her in the passenger seat and then he got behind the wheel, and drove to the village. Upon arrival, Melbourne parked at the entrance of the hostel where Victoria was staying and tried futilely to wake her up, but she was very numb from drunkenness. We have arrived, Victoria. Come on, wake up, Melbourne said, patting her cheeks. Victoria murmured through her teeth, sleepy, unable to wake up. Melbourne sighed resignedly, and wrapping his arms under her legs and down her back, he lifted her and carried her like a baby. And so carrying her took her to the hostel, where Emma, the owner of the hostel, went out to meet him. Emma was an old friend from Melbourne. He briefly explained how the girl had gotten drunk during the festival. "But do not think badly, Emma, she's a good girl," said Melbourne, justifying her. "Do not be silly, William. We've all been young. When I was a young girl I got drunk in worse ways," Emma replied, smiling. "I'm going to take her to her bedroom," said Melbourne. "You're going to take me to the bedroom without even kissing me first?" Victoria said she had half awakened, but she was confused and sleepy, still drunk. "Give me kiss, handsome," she added, trying to kiss William on the lips. "No!" cried Melbourne, turning his face away from her. "Remember that you vomited, Victoria." Emma burst out laughing, and Melbourne could not help but laugh too. Finally, Melbourne took Victoria to her bedroom and with the help of Emma placed her gently on her bed. Emma promised to take care of her and watch for her to be well. He went home exhausted but happy. In Victoria's dreams, the images of the festival mingled in a confused way with images of a dance, of a party in which people dressed in an elegant way but something rare for her, perhaps ancient. And the scene in which she was about to kiss Melbourne dressed in Scots was linked with another scene in which she too came close to him, but he dressed in a formal way and they were not outdoors like in the festival, but in a corridor illuminated with candles.